But now we've got the new CTP scheme up and running, and Tyndall Gask Bentley partner Barney Gask says, he's a lawyer, he says that South Australians injured in road accidents from today will face a new compensation scheme that is more complex with significantly reduced entitlements. Now, we knew that the entitlements were going to go by the wayside to a large extent, but the complexity, you know, you'd think that governments and simplicity would almost run together in parallel, but they don't. Let's talk with Tyndall Gask and Bentley partner Barney Gask. Barney, thanks for joining us. What is your issue about the CTP scheme as it stands now?
Good afternoon, Leon, and good afternoon to your listeners. Look, I think the comment you made during that intro then is the main point, which is we're in interesting times now. Basically, somebody who has or had an accident yesterday, instead of today, is likely to be much better off, and that's a real concern for victims.
All right. Pain and suffering's mainly why, isn't it?
That's right. So if I can give you a quick, I'll give a quick rundown of the law as it stood yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person was involved in a collision yesterday, as long as the collision wasn't their fault, and there was quite a minor or low threshold, which was as long as they had their normal enjoyment of life impaired for more than 7 days,
mm-hmm.
they then had an entitlement to pain and suffering, and to loss of income, both past and future, and to their medical expenses, etc. So the extent of that compensation was based pretty much on medical evidence. It was a relatively simple system, and in our view worked very well. What somebody who is involved in a collision now has to deal with, that is as of today, is that the government, through legislation, has introduced thresholds which apply to an entitlement to pain and suffering and to future loss of earning capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And those thresholds are based on new scales that have been introduced. I think I referred to it this morning as the injury severity scale. I think it's the injury scale value.
Yeah.
And what we know now, based on that legislation, is that those thresholds are very high.
All right. So that means that unless you are profoundly injured, you're not going to get much at all. So what happens to pain and suffering now?
Essentially, unless you hit, in terms of this injury scale value, unless you get to 11 points on that scale, you have no entitlement to pain and suffering.
Okay.
And what we know from that, injury scale value is that you've mentioned, I think it's been mentioned on air previously, the extent of some of those injuries, but it is alarming. If people had a look at the injury scale value and looked at what fell inside that 0 to 11 points, it is very concerning. The type of injuries people are going to have to deal with, and for which they're not going to receive anything for pain and suffering.
Okay, but they'll still get their medical compensation and so on, won't they?
They will. They'll get expenses paid. They'll get their past loss of income, but that's another concern as well, because it's a bit similar to the work cover system in that they'll get their past loss of income, but at 80%. So somebody who's earning $1,000 a week will lose $200 a week automatically, and from the moment they have their collision, due to these new laws. Now, I think there'd be a lot of people out there on that sort of income who are paying mortgages and other expenses, and the loss of $200 a week would be a major concern for them. Okay,
so what about the benefits to the motorists in terms of what they'll pay less in terms of regio?
So I think for this year, or as of today, there's a saving of around $100 a year. My understanding is there's been a reduction in that to something around $60 a year now. Leon, that's what we've been told so far. Where that goes from the year after that, I think remains to be seen. I wouldn't be surprised if or what people are paying for regios aren't dissimilar to what they're paying now in a few years' time, but that remains to be seen.
Okay, so if, God forbid, anyone listening today or any of their loved ones or friends gets into an accident, is a bodily injury, what should they do to make sure that they get what they deserve and what they should get? What should they do? How should they behave?
The system previously was quite simple as well in terms of but the legislation has introduced ways by which the accident and the claim needs to be notified. So there's new forms that need to be completed, and these changes are complex and they are complicated. They are complicated for lawyers, let alone somebody who doesn't understand the law and doesn't understand the legislation.
When the legal profession approached the government about this, because you guys as a profession were in negotiation with the government on this, and they were obviously complex, you must have registered the complexity of this, to which they replied what?
the executive raised that on a number of occasions. We had a system before that worked, that wasn't complex. We already had a 0 to 60 scale for pain and suffering, and those involved in collisions before yesterday would have some familiarity with that. But it was a system that worked. So there was, through the negotiations with government, I understand that it was raised quite consistently that are introducing a much more complex system that wasn't required. And my understanding is that it was based on a Queensland system. I think that was put to them, but they weren't prepared to change it.
All right. So if you get into an accident, you obviously, you will have comprehensive insurance, hopefully, but then, of course, the CTP is separate to that. So what's your advice in a nutshell?
Leon, look, I think it's essential that people get some advice. Look, whether they need, it might not be that they need representation necessarily, but I think anyone who has an accident from today, and people prior to today might want to get advice as well, but especially from today, get some legal advice. It might not be that you need to have representation, but at least to get some direction about what forms need to be completed and where things are heading. I think it's pretty crucial.
Barney, stay on the line. Tommy of Seaford has a question. Tommy, what would you like to ask Barney Gask?
Oh, I'd like to, sir, thank you to your colleague as well. Look, sir, I'm trying to understand the basic situation. If a person is injured in an automobile accident and he makes a claim and this goes to this government department and they make a settlement to this individual, does that sort of automatically cut out any, that's full and final settlement for any claim he might now or in the hereafter regarding the results of that accident? Or is in some manner or other possibly the driver of the vehicle still has got a problem?
Barney?
Look, every driver on the road, if they register their vehicle, is covered by the compulsory third-party insurance. So the responsible driver simply notifies the insurer of the claim, and I say insurer, but Allianz is the current claims manager. Allianz then deal with the claim. Tommy, but I think if your question is if you bring a claim as of today, and you receive compensation, if they then pay you some money at some stage in the future to finalise the claim, that is it. You can't come back.
Okay. All right, Barney, thank you for joining us. That's Barney Gask from Tyndall, Gask and Bentley.